Hi guys, welcome to another video about the skeletal system. Today we're not actually talking about bones, we're talking about skeletal cartilage. So let's get right into the video. So skeletal cartilages are just cartilages that are part of what we generally regard as the skeleton, which is the protective, supportive part of the body associated with bones. So there are three major types of skeletal cartilages, but before we get into that, I just want to talk about some general points. First, the composition of cartilages. Cartilages are actually mostly water, but aside from water, they're also composed of a salt called chondroitin sulfate, and that's what gives it the little springy texture. That's the base substance. They're avascular, which means that they don't contain any blood vessels or nerves. Instead, they get their nutrients by the perichondrium. Remember, peri means around a structure. So perichondrium, the root word chond, means cartilage. So the perichondrium is going to be a layer of connective tissue surrounding each piece of cartilage. And the perichondrium is not avascular. It does contain blood vessels and nerves. So the nutrients reach the perichondrium via the blood vessels, and then they diffuse from the blood vessels to the cells that reside in the cartilage, and that's how they get their nutrients. So because cartilage cells get all of their nutrients from blood vessels that are in the perichondrium, this limits the amount of thickness that cartilage pieces can have, because if they're too thick, then the nutrients would find it very difficult to diffuse into the center. So this is why you typically find that cartilage is in fairly small, thin layers. And lastly, chondrocytes are the name of the cells that are in cartilage. Chond means cartilage and cytes means cells. So chondrocytes are in cartilage and they're in the extracellular matrix, which is made up of chondroitin sulfate. Now let's get into the three major types of skeletal cartilage. The first type is called hyaline cartilage. Now the word hyaline actually comes from the root word for glass, and they have a kind of glassy appearance when they're exposed. So glass, they also confer great flexibility and resistance to whatever material is made up of that hyaline cartilage. They are formed by very thin, fine collagen fibers, and the chondrocytes that are kind of enmeshed within those collagen fibers are round. They have a translucent cytoplasm, they have little granules, and their nuclei, which they often have only one or two, are also round and nice and spherical in shape. So hyaline cartilage is the most common in the body, and it's found in a variety of different places. Some examples are articular cartilage. I know we talked about this briefly when discussing the gross anatomy of bone, but articular cartilage is just found where bones articulate or where they form joints. And they form kind of a, I don't want to say lubricating because cartilage is not a liquid, but they just reduce the friction that is found in joints. Costal cartilage, costal means associated with the ribs. So your ribs are actually bones that connect from your vertebrae to the front here, and they don't connect to your sternum via bones directly. They actually have costal cartilages on the end that form bridges between the ribs and the sternum. So costal cartilages are also hyaline. Respiratory cartilages are very diverse. They include the C-shaped rings that form up your trachea, a lot of the cartilages in your larynx. And finally, your nasal cartilages. So when you feel your nose right here, this all this hard stuff, this is not actually bone, except right up here, that is bone. Those are your nasal bones. But down here, that is all formed by hyaline cartilage. Now moving on to the second type of cartilage, which is elastic cartilage. So elastic cartilage and hyaline cartilage are actually very similar, except that elastic cartilage has more elastic fibers. And this is formed by a protein naturally called elastin. And this gives it a kind of yellowish color in comparison to hyaline, which is more clear and glassy. And elastic cartilage has chondrocytes weaved in between these elastin fibers. They do also have some collagen fibers, but the composition is slightly different compared to hyaline. And the locations that elastic cartilage is found in the body, this is quite rare actually. It's in only a few places, and that is the epiglottis, which is a piece of elastic cartilage that blocks off your windpipe when you're swallowing, so you don't swallow into your respiratory system, and the pinnae, which is just a fancy word for your external ears. So this is hyaline cartilage, and this is elastic cartilage. Lastly, we have fibrocartilage. So fibrocartilage is what it sounds like. It's very fibrous. It has great compressile and tensile strength, which means that it resists a lot of force. And this is kind of a good combination of the hyaline and elastic cartilages because it consists of thick collagen fibers with chondrocytes in parallel rows. And this is what gives it that great strength. And it is white in color. So the locations that fibrocartilage is found in the body are the pubic symphysis, which is where your two hip bones join here in the middle. There's a disc in the middle that is made of fibrocartilage, and it's very flexible. The TMJ, which is your temporal mandibular joint right here, where your mandible joins your temporal bone. Intervertebral discs, so in between each of your vertebrae is a round disc, so that your bones don't like just stack directly on top of each other. That would be a lot of vibration. So you have intervertebral discs as a shock absorber, and they consist of a little jelly-like substance in the middle and what is called an annulus fibrosus, which is like a fibrous ring composed of fibrocartilage, and that forms the outer part of the IV disc. And lastly, the menisci of the knee joints. So these are like little fibrocartilage discs in your knees that also serve similar fashions as intervertebral discs in that they also help absorb shock when you're running. That's it for today's video. I hope you enjoyed this lecture. Comment down below any questions or comments that you have, and see you next time. Bye!